What's up, guys? I'm SaltEMike, and this is your Star Citizen Week in Review for October 11th, 2021. We have so much to go through. We have 315 on the PTU, we have CitizenCon, we have monthly reports, we have roadmap roundups, and so much more on today's Week in Review. And if this is your first week in review, this is where I take all of the official news coming out of Star Citizen each week, putting it into one video and throwing my opinions in there as well. If you didn't know, I do live stream on twitch.tv/SaltEMike every day but Monday, so I can get this video out to you guys. So yeah, we have a lot to get through. We're going to start out with 315 being on the PTU. 315, patch notes are out, it's on the PTU, it's in Wave 1. And I know many of you guys cannot experience it yet, but honestly, there's nothing in the notes that we haven't discussed in past weeks in review. So I'll make a separate video on this week about the 315 patch, so get subscribed, don't miss it. But if you were living under a rock or you haven't watched any weeks in review in the past, hospitals and medical gameplay are now in. Actual working inventories and looting players and NPCs as well. Missile defense turrets at outposts. At those outposts, new infiltrate and defend missions that have variety to the mission types, bombs, and honestly, that's basically it in a broad sense. I will go into more detail on everything in the patch notes video. So we're going to move right on to the monthly report where, as always, we start out with AI. And again, as always, there's not a lot that we're going to see here because of the server's performance. So the main thing that I want to point out is they're working on AI perception. I feel like this is not something we'll see until the servers are better or until whatever performance issues that are going on are resolved. But I think it's very important for missions to be less boring, more dynamic, all that stuff when the AI just starts to respond to us. It gives us the ability to complete missions in multiple ways, like stealthy or peaceful perhaps, and instead of the constant run and gun like we have now. CIG tried to showcase their work here at CitizenCon. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. I think it failed miserably. Character art. Skinning new armors. You know, that's probably the Xeno and Ninetales armor that we'll talk about in a few minutes. Also more sub-helmets. Hopefully they're getting, you know, helmets that are as cool as the leather armor one. Not some of the duds we've been getting lately. Ships. This is likely to be old news by the time the video releases, but the Vulture is moving along as well as the Hull series ships, and they mentioned a lot of unannounced ships that we'll touch on because they're not unannounced anymore. Engine. This is the greatest hits from 2019 CitizenCon. Yeah, the one from 2 years ago. Remember the cloth that was taken off the Ursa? That's the soft body implementation that you're seeing on the screen here. More Gen 12 work. A lot of mentions about cloud tech improvements. They said that they weren't happy with them on release, and they have had plans to keep improving on them. And we will see that and talk about that a bit later. There was some server meshing done, work done as well from the engine team, and again, I think we'll talk a bit more about that. Most of this stuff that came out earlier in the week was definitely stuff that was geared towards CitizenCon. Character features. This is kind of cool. They worked on animations for the multi-tool. It can now reload its main function, so that I guess the top where you would put the mining attachment or the medical attachment, but then also the battery that powers it. So I think that's pretty neat. Moving on to gameplay features, my favorite part of Star Citizen, the gameplay. The entire monthly report for gameplay features is in this box on the screen, this little box. Exciting. Jokes aside, various mission teams are connecting content to the reputation system. This is one of those things that I've said that they absolutely have to do for me to be happy with their development. And each quarter they need to add more and more and more to that system. Vehicle features. They've been working on jump points, the Hull C, and other stuff we've seen on sprint reports. More turret improvements, which is interesting because I think they were pretty awesome, as well as missile improvements. So maybe some missile turrets. Narrative. You may have noticed this during Xeno, but they want to make organizations have multiple scopes that you can gain reputation in. They felt it wasn't clear enough, apparently, so they're trying to make it more clear. They're also standardizing cargo units and armor from storage points to micro SCU. So a micro SCU unit is 1 million micro SCU makes 1 SCU. And we did the math on stream this week. So each micro SU unit is about 1 centimeter cubed or something like that. So it kind of makes it easy to measure each item in game to determine how much it should take up in your storage. UI. They're working on Star Map UI, which anyone who's played this game knows is not fun to use. And lastly, VFX. They mentioned theaters of war. So that is all about that. Roadmap Roundup. Most of the roadmap is representing their downstream team's progress being added to the last patch of the year in December. Player item shard transition. This is basically the coffee cup tech, from what I can understand, that CR has been hinting on for a few years now. This is a big deal. It's really important to the game, to, well, being a game. The odd mention is kind of ships, so it still sounds like we cannot leave a ship out in space and just have everything be in it and it be there perfectly where it was left out. I wonder if leaving it on a planet or random location is still considered stored or whatnot. So this is really needed for that stuff. And then 2 basic ones: character creation for Squadron 42, name resolving API. No real clue what this is. And then the next 2 are massive. AI navigation links for elevators and transit. AI will be able to use trains and elevators, a key step, so that 9-to-1 NPC to player ratio exists. And, you know, the landing zones feel alive. The world feels alive. It's just better. Speaking of that, civilian NPC improvements are also key to having that living, breathing feel, because NPCs don't really move that natural right now. So that'll be a help. And the next chunk is mostly cosmetic. The Grey Cat Salvage backpack geared towards salvage materials. This is interesting. Still very curious how salvage will play out, but I guess we'll find out sometime soon. The rest are medical outfits, so 1 for each hospital type, basically. The last group's also cosmetic. DNA head textures. This should make characters look better. Xeno threat armor. It's not just for Xeno, but also Ninetales is going to be worked on. The fire extinguisher, man. Thank goodness we have that 1-kill wonder back on the roadmap. And finally, release view updates: Grimhex Clinic and Crusader A2, both passed a review and will be in 3.15. And now moving on to CitizenCon. This is not a CitizenCon to me. I think you were all here for my reaction, most likely, to what CitizenCon was, and I think it basically was a long-form pillar talk. There was some good moments and some not so good. I'll quickly highlight them here, as my reactions are going to be posted on YouTube either later today, Tuesday maybe. There's a lot of work that's going to go into that I'll probably make an announcement for, or maybe a poll. I have some questions to ask you guys about what I should be doing here. But let's start out with the opener. It's really why I said it wasn't a CitizenCon, because it didn't have the standard opener that CR would do, kind of talking about where they came from, where they're going, how they need more funding, you know, that kind of stuff. So moving on, there was the Life in the Verse panel. This was said by Xylo to be the keynote. 90% of this panel was literally concept art for Pyro, or the same concepts that we've seen on ISC for a year about outposts. They did transition to a mission, and I say that very lightly. If you compare to the 2019 CitizenCon, where we see very little functionality of that in-game currently, at least they showed actual mission objectives on the HUD and the logic recognizing that. And in this, there's no HUD. It's completely clean, which tells me it was completely faked. Anyway, it was this mission that you had to get an artifact at a trading post on Pyro 3. Started out in the 400i, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and the whole point was to show these clouds, I feel like. At least the beginning, which do look fantastic. I've been saying this for days, though. You can't play clouds, so I'm more interested in the mission and how it plays out. They gave 3 scenarios possible. You go down to the trading post and buy the artifact, which is extremely expensive. Could kill the guy and take it and fight your way out, or the last one was your reputation is already bad with this faction and you'll have to fight your way in to get the artifact. This all was really interesting, but again, it was so fake. It was so fake. The NPCs were mostly not reactive, and while I love the fact that the outposts are not being built 100% as art and have gameplay in mind, I think that was like the main big positive takeaway to come from this. I would have loved to see working mission logic that we could look forward to playing sometime in the near future. Ship talk. This was similar to the first panel, where it was mostly concept art, but they unveiled 2 new ships. The 400i, which is a real thing, I guess, and it's basically a Connie competitor from Origin. It's $220 for new money, and $250 if you're using any store credit. Really not a whole lot to say on this, to be honest, because honestly, the ships that are in that class, the Connie, is like sort of underwhelming. It's in this like weird middle ground that doesn't have a lot of function, but is cool, and everybody really wants it to be awesome, but the game functionality maybe just isn't there for it yet. And the next one is the Anvil Liberator. This is the one I'm interested in because I think it has an actual impact on the game for me. They made a pocket carrier, so it fits 2 small ships, 1 extra small ship, and 2 ground vehicles. For me, it just moves the ship plus the cargo that, like, our little mining operations that we've done in the past with like 10 or 15 people, like this would be really great for logistics for that. It is really expensive though. $500 for new cash, $575 with any store credit. I mean, these numbers are just insane for a game in the state that it's in. I want it so bad for its functionality if and when it comes in the game, but I'm probably gonna wait to earn it in game. Next up, we have the Banu Merchantman. Most of this is still just kind of concept art. There are a ton of details that went into this. They've been spending, I think they said, a year working on this. This was their most difficult ship, and it's understandable. The main thing is that it looks very different from the concepts, and it just has a ton of firepower. But guys, if you're really interested in the Banu Merchantman and hearing more about it, link for this panel will be in the description down below. Then they had a ship contest. At 2019 CitizenCon, they showed us the silhouette of 4 ships, 3 of which are in-game already, all playable, and they should be showing us the 4th very soon. This time, they have 5 ships that we can vote on. An explorer, a ground vehicle, a hover ship, like a motorcycle basically, and a bomber. I felt like last time we got a lot more detail on what the ships were and the kind of lore background behind them, but I can say none of these are impactful as the previous 2019 CitizenCon ones. CIG has just like a more well-rounded ship lineup now, and it's kind of more of a style preference when it comes to career-based ships because there's no gameplay associated with them. So it just comes down to what you think is the coolest, right? Next is the Gen 12 renderer and Vulcan panels. I had no idea what was happening here. Like for most of this, but then they did share this.
We've done a huge amount of work already. The architecture is all in place, and we're using this hybrid rendering approach where we're combining elements of the old and new render at the same time to allow us to move piecemeal to the new system. All of the post effects, fog, and lighting have been converted over, and they're all enabled by default in 3.15. And the fundamentals of scene and geometry rendering are all in place, but they're still being worked on. So our main focus is finishing that off at the moment, and once that's done, our focus will shift to the remaining major systems, which are gas clouds, the render-to-texture system, and a few special cases for transparency.
I think for me, that was a big help. I'm kind of really looking at where they are. Where do you have to go for us as players to see impact in the game from this tech? And I think that they did a good job of explaining that in the clip. Next up is Crafting Worlds. This panel was significantly better than what was shown during the Life in the Verse panel. A lot of the stuff seems like pretty close to being in our hands, and we saw mostly tools. But what stuck out to me is that they made improvements on how objects spawn on planets, but more importantly, they gave the players the ability to determine how far out the objects render to improve performance. So it should be a possible menu item in the near future. They also hinted at seasons being a thing, which is crazy, and the health of plants being able to change, but it was all super work in progress. They showed more rivers and still had a way to go before we see them in game. Then they dropped what I would call a semi-bomb. They showed us how they'll make bases and how they'll place them, which was of course kind of meh. But then they said this.
And last but not least, some of you might have noticed that the UI is not looking quite like an engine UI. And that's normal, as it's based on our in-game UI tech building blocks, and that for a reason. Well, today it's being used by our developers. One day, when it's ready and been thoroughly tested internally, we'll make a version available to you, the player. And Rasta, it's what? will make you a pioneer.
So their UI to make these outposts and little mini towns, I guess almost, is the same, is being built out for us. The intention is for us to use it. And I think that that's really cool. So yeah, I think it's ways out probably. And I think it's a little premature to get excited about, but I love that they have us in mind when making the tools for themselves. Server meshing and the state of persistence, this one went right over my head, but they did their best to communicate what was going on with really good animations and graphs and all that. And for me, this was the most relevant information about where they are now and what needs to be done to kind of get us there.
While the underlying tech is close to completion, there are some upcoming challenges that we need to solve before we can give that into your hands. The first version of this technology will contain a static server mesh. Instead of the fully dynamic mesh that we saw earlier, the static mesh assigns server nodes to predefined sections of the solar system. This will reduce the amount of authority transfer that game code has to address in this first release. There will also be a lot of challenges for the game services and game feature teams. Or maybe Benoit can give a little bit more.
And so many teams in the company now need to change their feature to take into account the meshing technology that's behind it, because the concept of server, which has been ingrained since the beginning, has changed to become a mesh of servers.
I think it's interesting that a lot of the legwork is done on their end, but now the entire company has to basically remake the game to deal with this major hurdle, that it's not just one server anymore, it's multiple. And this isn't mentioning the massive amount of bugs and issues that are going to come from this. Next up was Sounds of Space panel. You should just watch this one yourself because it's about sound and I'm not just going to play the whole thing for you guys. Next is Systematic Gameplay, Stream of Thought. This is the perfect title because it was mostly just rambling about the possibilities of their designs, but not much of the realities of what the players will have in their hands now or in the near future, or I doubt anything they talked about even exists. Talked a lot about how cargo, about cargo and how it's going to change and be physical, and it'll be a pain to fill our larger ships, which should give a role for the smaller ones, and that's a great thing. They also mentioned a bit about reputation, but not as much as I would have liked. They also implied that the Quanta system will be making more and more impacts on the game, like it'll determine the availability of prices for service beacons, the pricing of 3 commodities. It sounds like plasma fuel, quantum fuel, and repair materials, 2 of which are new to us. And lastly, in 3.16, they plan on having us trigger Jumptown 2 as players instead of a developer pressing the button. That's a big deal. I would have shared the clips of Tony talking, but I couldn't because he was just kind of too fast and giving a little bit too much detail for what I wanted to share with you guys today. So that was CitizenCon. In general, again, didn't really feel like a CitizenCon to me. It felt like a pillar talk. I would say I was disappointed and I didn't have high expectations. I'd love to hear what you guys think, but yeah, just really excited about trying out 3.15. What's to come in 3.16. I'm more focused on the present than I am focused on the future because they just talk so much and there's not that as much action as they are talking. Moving on to other updates, we had a hotfix for trading. They released a hotfix to correct the inventory refresh rates. We will have to see what that means, but I'm really hoping trading is back on the menu for 3.15 because it could mean that much more. That 3.15 is that great. I wonder if you're able to, if you blow up a ship, does the inventory, like, what happens? That's exciting. Cosplay Contest at CitizenCon, this is the last thing that we'll talk about today. These were insane, but this was my favorite. Sorry, Kin Shadow, sorry, Engineer, I love you guys, but this was a god tier cosplay. Thank you so much for that. And guys, thank you for watching. This was a lot to put together today, and it's not as detailed or as exciting as I would like it to be personally. I'll do my best to put out more content in regards to this, but honestly, CitizenCon was so much about game development and so little about the game, I had a hard time putting it together in the way we normally put together weeks in review. So thanks for watching, guys. I really, really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll see you next week for probably very little to talk about. But yes, looking forward to it. Make sure you hit subscribe, leave a like, and comment down below on anything we just discussed today. And I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye, everybody.